Everyone. So there's been some requests this week for a little more information on shading and the materials because it's been pointed out that the content videos are a little shorter than usual. So I'm going to supplement that for you now. So give me a second. I'm going to try to get my above camera to work. Let's see. Hang on. Aha. Okay. So let's talk about the materials from the supply list. Let me put my phone somewhere else. Okay, so for starters, we have our 18 by 24 paper that you could see here. So for your sketchbooks during the week, you can use your sketchbook paper, but your project drawing should always be on your big 18 by 24 paper. Next we have, so I only actually required you to get 2 pencils. So one is a 2B. So 2B pencil is pretty similar, basically the same as a number 2 pencil that you might have had as a kid. Usually I have this mechanical pencil here, which is the equivalent. I like using these. And then a 6B pencil. So the 6B is, so when you have anything with the B after it and the number gets higher, the lead is going to get softer. So that actually means the softer the lead is, the darker your mark is going to be. And anything that is a harder lead, your line won't be as dark. So this one is, I didn't put this on your supply list, but it's called 2H pencils. When you start to get into ones with the H's, the lead is like super, super hard. So as you can see, you got a really, you can probably barely see it in this camera recording, a super light line. So these are great when you're like drafting something and you want to be able to erase your lines nicely afterwards. But now that we're thinking a lot about shading and value, the 6B pencil will be your best friend if you're looking to be a pencil person. But what I'm going to strongly recommend, actually, since you are all tasked with producing some pretty big drawings in only 1 week, the 18 by 24, I actually think charcoal is a great bet to use when you're trying to build up a range of values. Trying to make my hands expressive here to keep you engaged. So yeah, so let's look at the charcoal. So we went through our pencils. Actually, yeah, sorry, I wrote down a little list here of everything I want to talk about. So yeah, let's look at the charcoal first. So you've got 2 different kinds of charcoal from the supply list. So one is called the vine charcoal here. Let's see. Yep, it says vine charcoal, and the other is the compressed. I don't know why the Blick brand, it says pastels on it, but it's not. This is charcoal. You could see it written here, but I think it's a little misleading the way that they did that. Here we go. Charcoal square pastels, they call it. Yeah, so we've got these. So here's the difference. So I'm gonna recommend, I've seen some of you draw out your shapes with pencil and then fill it in with charcoal. I'm gonna suggest you be a purist, and if you're using pencil, only use pencil, and if you're using charcoal, only use charcoal. I don't find that they mix well. I think charcoal will naturally make you draw bigger, so then you'll be trying to fill in tighter spaces that you created with the pencil. And also, I just think you'll see with the charcoal, you can get a really nice range of values. So if anyone out there finds mixing graphite and charcoal to be thrilling, reach out to me. I really don't enjoy it and don't recommend it, but maybe you find your own way. So the vine charcoal comes like this in these sticks. I usually, what you could do is break it apart. So I usually break it into like a smaller piece, sometimes even smaller than this. And yeah, so the vine charcoal, you can get this really nice dark marks. But the nice thing is if you just go over it with your finger, it's way more forgiving. Lucy will compare to the compressed charcoal is way less forgiving. So I actually, if you kind of make some lighter marks with this, you can just keep working over it. I really recommend like drafting out your shapes with the vine charcoal. Like this is what you can do to lay out your sketch, kind of your blueprint. And you can also build up a range of value with the vine charcoal too. So you could see I'm laying down, this is about as dark as it goes, which when we compare it to the compressed, you'll see is much more gray, whereas the compressed gets super jet black. But even just with your finger, you can already start to do some blending. And that's all. That's why I love the charcoal too. I mean, look at this pretty big area we already covered with some really nice shading, and we barely did anything. So now if I wanted to make this darker up here, I could add a little more charcoal to the top. Yeah. And yeah, I just feel like you can cover so much of your paper so much more quickly than when you try to work up, you see with only pencil, it's like gonna take at least like double the time, I think. You can blend with pencil too, but I just think when you're tasked with going this big, pencil is just gonna feel like way more labor for the 1 week you have to do everything. So I'm a charcoal fan, and also you can get super rich darks and really light lights with the charcoal. So I think it's a good bet. But if you're a pencil person, or that was all, some of you are in situations overseas, you didn't have access to everything, you could certainly use pencil, but try to get a hold of one of the 6Bs because that's going to let you get really, really dark. Whereas, using a regular just number 2 pencil is going to be more work to get you there. All right, so that's our vine charcoal here. Next we have our compressed. So this is gonna look more blocky. Whereas the other one, although you don't have a wood around it, is gonna remind you a little more of a pencil. So you can see already, if this is the darkest here that the vine charcoal goes, if I lay down, you can see like this might have looked black to you before, but now in comparison, this is super jet black. And you can see how dirty it gets too. So again, you can do a lot of blending with your hand is super nice. I'm big on using my finger to help me draw. But yeah, so that's compressed charcoal. I really recommend pretty much drafting everything in the vine charcoal, even starting to add in value with the vine charcoal. And then I would really only reserve the compressed charcoal for going in because you want to really punch up the darker areas that are in shadow. That's why I'd save this for last. I wouldn't start out with the compressed because you could see it's super unforgiving. The vine will go away, but the vine goes away pretty much with just pushing your hand around, but the compress is not going to. So that brings us to erasers. So let's start blending some. So eraser. So this one, I put this exact brand on a supply list. I think this only like a couple dollars, maybe even $1 somewhere. Maybe, yeah, I forget how much, but it's not expensive. But this specific eraser, I think is like your best bet for trying to erase something. So you could see it's pretty powerful. It's called I think some other brands make it, but this is probably the best brand, I think, the Mars Plastic Eraser. So this is your best bet. If you feel like you're like, oh no, I shouldn't have done that. This is going to be your best bet for taking the charcoal off the page. But as you could see, there's still going to be a ghost of it. Charcoal does really tend to stain things. But this is your best bet. So I strongly recommend it. You could see when I'm trying to pull out the compressed, there's more of a stain, then it pretty much sliced right through that vine charcoal. So this is a great thing to have in your toolkit. Next, we have the kneaded eraser. So these are really fun, even if you're having some anxiety. They're a little like a stress ball. They're supposed to be self-cleaning. So as they start to get dirty, which with the charcoal, they'll get dirty pretty fast compared to using them with pencil. If you have a couple, I would reserve one for when you're working with pencil and another for when you're working with charcoal. But what's nice about these, they're not as powerful and aggressive as the plastic eraser, but you can really use these to create shading. So you can use them, mold them into a shape and kind of work them back in to the value you laid down, maybe to reduce something that was too dark, and you can almost do a bit of blending with it. So it's almost more like a drawing tool than what we think of as an eraser or trying to totally remove something. Yeah, so we don't go into it so much in the content, but it could be called subtractive or reductive drawing, where you lay down value and then you take away from it to help create the tones that you want. So that's a kneaded eraser. It's really fun. I strongly recommend it. And then next up, I did not put this on the supply list, but I would really recommend if you get a chance to grab one of these. Let's see, this is the brand here, Factus BM2, but they come in number prints. So it's a mechanical eraser. So the nice thing with this one is you could see, whoop, it's super skinny. They make ones that are thicker too, which are great. But this one I love, like if you want to pull out a tiny highlight and something. So here's here's my little Lucy doll, but you could see there's all kinds of, she's super shiny. I love Peanuts, Charlie Brown. There's all kinds of bright little highlights on here. So say I wanted to go in and put some of those in, all I need to do is use this little mechanical eraser. You could see, you can get some really tight little bright highlights, which is super fun. You can also, make that happen if you reserve a corner, maybe of your plastic eraser. You can start to make that happen too. So other ways to get there, but if you got a few bucks and you've got Amazon Prime or some way of getting something to you quick before the class is over, I really recommend these. All right, so that's erasers. Next we have blending stumps. So those are these. They come in different sizes. So I tend to be a big finger blender, but I do use these as well. Especially I really like these tiny ones. So they're great for blending little detail, but use them as if they were your own finger. So if you had an area here and you wanted to blend it, you use it, you basically pretend it's an extension of your finger, and they make much bigger ones. So if you really don't want to, if you're trying to avoid getting your hands dirty, you can get those bigger stumps that aren't quite as big as your finger, but much closer. So yeah, these are great. I use them all the time, but especially I tend to favor these little ones. So just to show you quick, I don't know, no pressure to if anyone had looked at like my art or my website, but I use charcoal a lot. Let's see if I can get this drawing in here. Yeah, so this is a charcoal drawing I did. So charcoal is great for drawing super big, but I actually use it in a really tight way. So I use that mechanical eraser a ton drawing this, and also those little tiny blending stumps, because it allowed me to shade in to some tiny areas. So those can be your friends if you're someone who really likes to do a lot of detail. But for now, you got 1 week every week, and you're working on this pretty big, substantial paper. So, you don't, what's the expression? Don't look at the leaves instead of the trees or something. You want to keep your eye on the bigger picture, but it can be fun to go in and add some little details places. All right. So last but not least, it's not officially on your supply list, but you all had to make one this week. This is your value scale. So when we think about blending, as I just did with my finger and with the stumps, that's the idea of that as we notice there's different tones along things, that they don't look compartmentalized as they do here in the value scale. They're actually, they continuous tone is the term that's in the content. They seamlessly blend into each other. So those are your finger, and the stumps are going to be your best friend for doing that. You can also build it up using only the charcoal too, but I think it's really fun to blend with those tools. So that being said, yeah, so I suggest either the one you drew, or you can print one out as well, and keep it by you. So we will return to the value scale in a moment, according to my notes. So next up, I want to talk about, so during week 2, we talked all about contour line and cross contour line. So if you remember that, there was already so much we could do to show lighting and shadow and value just in our line. So for example, if you are drawing a sphere, I'm just gonna make this up out of my head. In reality, I really want you to look at things from observation, but for now, if I was drawing a sphere, let's see. The line doesn't need to be uniform all the way around. Maybe there's a light source coming from here. So maybe my line is even like super thick on this side. Ooh, I made that even thicker than I wanted to. And then gets super light around here. So there's ways to adjust our line that we can show that. So I want you to keep that in mind as you progress to the shading. Sound good? Next up, I want you to think about, so that was our contour line, which is the outer edges of things, and we can vary our line weight there, which means, adjusting your pressure from thick to thin. The next thing I want you to think about is that we talked about cross contour lines. So those are actually going to come, we're going to be still kind of seeing those in our head as we shade. So if we have these 2 circles here, remember that the idea of cross contour lines are to create the illusion of three-dimensionality on a two-dimensional surface. So like our biggest task with drawing, especially in this course, is we're looking at our still lives, which are three-dimensional. We're translating them into 2 dimensions, but we want to give the illusion of three-dimensionality. So the cross contour lines really helped us do that. So if we were thinking about if this was a sphere already, we want to try to develop a sense of dimensionality. So it doesn't just look like a flat circle. So when we had our cross contour lines, you know, you might think about the longitude and latitude on a globe, that being the path, correct? So as we start to shade, you don't want to lay your marks down, your shading marks down like this, because that's what's that going to do? It's going to flatten the form. It's going to make it look flat. So maybe as you lay down your shading, so usually what I would do, maybe lay down a little bit of charcoal here, but I'm going to kind of follow those paths. You could see like my hand is going in that direction. And you can even thicken this up. And just to show you, to bring in that compressed charcoal, say what feels like this area is really in shadow, I can add some here. Same thing, but I'm going to blend it up around the form. Ooh. So I'm following that cross contour path, and it's going to start to look more rounded, as opposed to if I start laying everything down like this and working it straight up and down to give my shading, it's not going to feel three-dimensional. So hopefully you can see that from home. Yeah, so next thing I'd want to mention is cast shadow. So those are brought up a lot in the content, and you'll see them all the time. Everything has a cast shadow. If you're outside, depending on the time of the day, you'll have like super harsh cast shadow, and other times they can be more diffused. I mean, and if you're inside, look how many cast shadows of my hands there are right now, because in my room there's overhead lights, like in the ceiling I have Christmas lights, so I'm getting like this whole mix of shadows here. So that could be confusing, but also kind of visually fun. You could see like the right under my hands are darker, and then there's like extra ones that are lighter, so you can play around with that. But say here's like a traditional cast shadow. So typically, so I might fill it in with just like a light gray here, or a middle gray from the value scale. I'm already losing my sphere a bit. But typically what happens with cast shadows is they tend to be darkest, closest to the object that is creating the cast shadow. So I might, now that I established my shadow, I'm gonna go in with the compressed charcoal, and in that beginning of the shadow, add some really rich tone. And so they start out the darkest next to the object, and then they tend to get a little lighter as they move out. So they start to fade a little. And even ones, I could see the shadows here of my fingers are like kind of crispy along the edges, but if you look closely, they tend to either totally feather away depending on the situation, or they kind of diffuse at the edges. So you could go back in with your blending stump and kind of like diffuse and make a little feathery around your edges, because that's usually what happens with shadows in reality. They don't stop super harshly as if you had cut them out of paper typically. And another thing you might want to think about, there in the content, they talk about reflective highlights. So that happens sometimes. It doesn't always happen. It depends on the lighting situation, but on the edges of objects. So you might want to go in with your eraser and pull some of that out. My sheet better. So you can start to see, yeah, so there's a reflective highlight happening. And let's round out our ball. Maybe even there's like a really bright highlight somewhere, and you can go back in with your, oh, it's a little hard to see, but maybe there was somehow one up here. You can go back in with your eraser and put that in. So that is the cast shadow. Yeah, so that we're blowing through it. I really only have one more thing that I want to talk about. So when we look at the value scale, one thing that's on the rubric like constantly for the rest of the course is use of the entire value scale, and then also throughout your drawing. So what does this mean? When we think of the entire value scale, what I see a lot, especially students that are just using pencil, is also why I really recommend the charcoal, is a super focus on just the middle grays. It'll be like there's really only 3 values in their whole drawing and they're right from the middle. And that can make your drawing look like super dull. It just won't have a lot of life to it. What you really want to try to incorporate is a lot of contrast. So that means, what is contrast? Contrast is pairing typically a really light value next to a dark value, and that will make your drawings more dynamic. But what the rubric always pushes, which is I think super important, is trying to incorporate the entire value scale throughout your drawing. So you don't want to just omit entire sections of the value scale. You want to make sure you have super, super, super dark areas, which is where the compressed charcoal comes in. You want to have your middle grays. You can establish this with the bind charcoal and your smudging, and then you can leave areas super light and white. But I would really only reserve these values for the absolute brightest areas in your drawing. So don't leave, when you leave like vast areas of the paper super white, it's just going to flatten your work. So in your negative space, even just having a little bit of like subtle tone in the background, I don't know, it's a little hard to see on the camera, but just having a little bit of subtle tone is gonna make your work look more lifelike. If you have any area, like a big area that's all the same value, whether it's white or whether it's black or something in the middle, when there's no shifts in there, it's just going to flatten your work. So you want to think about incorporating the whole value scale, but also throughout the entire page. That's your goal. And you want to also think about like definitely bumping up your contrast too, because that will make it super dynamic. And the fancy word for that in the content is a chiaroscuro. I never feel confident saying that I say it correctly. And finally, what Professor Bevilacqua, I say her name wrong, so you probably saw me cheating by looking at my notebook. But one thing she does talk about in her video is local color. So local color would be, you know, a lot of times if you're, say you're wearing you're drawing 2 friends, one has a black shirt and one has a blue shirt. A lot of times when we start to have to think grayscale, which is turning things into black and white, we'll draw the friend's black shirt to be the same value as the friend's blue shirt, which in reality, if you grayscaled it, they're probably going to appear a little different on the value scale. So one little example I have of that here, let's bring my Charlie Brown and my Lucy back. So we could see here that the shoes are brown and the shirt is yellow. So if we want to think along the value scale, my guess is that the yellow shirt would be lighter on the value scale and maybe the brown shoes are darker. So when you choose, if you were drawing this, you wouldn't want to make I'm getting my Charlie Brown dirty. You wouldn't want to make it the same. So that's what local color is. As far as your project for this week, make sure you arrange like an actual still life. So grab objects, arrange them in front of you. Do not zoom out, meaning like include a bunch of areas of the furniture, or don't make most of your drawing the table. The focus should be your object. So even though this Charlie Brown is super tiny in real life, you know, if I wanted to include him, maybe I'm gonna establish his head as even being like this big on the page. Maybe that's a little too big. Maybe more like this, so we could start to get in the full figure, but we want to zoom in on our objects. And I'm telling you that I just think that charcoal is your best bet with that. But if you only have pencil, you can totally make that happen as well. You just have to, it's a little more challenging to get yourself to draw big with pencil, I find, because the charcoal is thicker. It's just going to give you a bigger mark and you'll naturally draw bigger. Yeah, so that being said, I hope this was helpful. And I definitely look forward to seeing your drawings this week. Let's see if I can switch my camera back to me. Ooh. Okay, so that is it. Also, your fingers are gonna get super dirty if you're using the charcoal, so is a badge of honor. You are an artist now, so now people will know with your dirty hands. All right, I hope you all have a great weekend, and I will hear from you soon. Figuring out how to stop recording. All right, that's it. Goodbye.